Hello, I'm Ian. Welcome to my workshop and to the 8th and final part in this introductory series where we're making a pencil case. So that consists of an inner box, a dovetailed box, with a separate lift-out tray which has a sliding fit, all contained around an outer casing which has this oblique cut and a friction fit. So this is an in-depth video tutorial. It's over 2 hours long, so I've broken it down into the individual component pieces, starting with the outer casing. So the first thing we'll do is make the case, and I've given you some rough dimensions or some suggestions for the dimensions for that. It's made as a square section, be rectangular, and then it has an oblique cut through it, and that's all done by hand. But this project is slightly different to the previous ones in that, although I've given you dimensions to make the case, once we've made that, then the box with inside it and the tray with inside that are all made to fit. So you're working more to a knife line and to replicating dimensions rather than using rules and making things to a component size to begin with. Now, this is a bit like how you'll fit drawers when we move into furniture making. So the first thing I shall do is look through my stock. In this case I have some sycamore, decide where I'm going to take my pieces from for the case, take out the matching parts, plane them all to the same dimensions, add the joints and join it together to make the case. And so, just as ever before, test the cut of the set of the iron. Take a shaving on one side, shaving in the middle, and shaving in the other. It should just cut the same in all three places. Put them together, pinch in the corners, nothing should open up. Good, nice and straight. So those are our two reference edges. So there's quite a lot to come out here, but don't be daunted by that. Just add some cut onto the plane and you'll soon cut your way through it. Okay, now that's quite a heavy cut, so I want to really finesse that edge. So I'll back the iron out until it's a much finer cut, and now just dress that edge with a very fine iron. That's better. Set the calipers to dimension, to the width of the narrow parts, and then transfer that to the cutting gauge. And we want it bevel out. We're referencing off the reference edge, our face edge. The shoulder line on the inside and the bevel on the waist side. So set that to 56. And shoot all the parts to dimension. Okay, so these are the four sides, top and bottom, and then the left and right side. They're made as a nice pair now. Everything's nicely lined up and level, and they're all been shot to length as well. And to do that, I just measured one of them, shot that to length, made it nice and square both ends, and then used that as the master to feel for all the others. You don't need to do any more marking out, you just make everything feel exactly the same from the one masterpiece. And now move on to they're just awaiting their the jointing. I'll do those in a moment. But I just want to need to prep these. These are the two ends. You've got a choice of the ends. You can do a single piece or like a T-section. But for now, these both need to be made square. And there's quite a lot to come off to make them square. So I shall prep that. Okay, so there's my line. Just sawn this off roughly. Now, as I'm planing this, it is going to wobble all over the place and look as though it's out of control, but don't be alarmed by that. It's quite normal for such small pieces. So I'll just all I'm trying to do initially is to make it a parallel cut to the scribe line. Once I've done that, I'll do that on both pieces. So you can see at the moment there's just loads, there's a hump in the middle and big old gaps at the end. Just keep monitoring what you're doing, keep planing it until you get a parallel cut. And then it'll become much easier. Take a bit off there. Yeah, okay, so now we're down to parallel cut with a tiny bit left to go. So now I can back the iron off. So we're not taking away all the waste material. We're just trying to refine our edge now. Add a bit more. Right, now I can just keep working it until that edge just disappears. And if the plane does this and the whole thing is wobbling around, that's also perfectly normal, provided that the workpiece and the plane move together. If you're doing this, that's not good. You'll just start taking the corners off. So we're almost there. There's a tiny little feathery edge just hanging on. So now we're actually down to a little shoulder line. There's a tiny highlighted edge just there. It's just still hanging on. Remove that. One more will be down to a clean face, and that's it. Exactly the same on the other one. Cut all the way through. And that's it. And they should be exactly the same. And then use that same cutting gauge setting and mark off the waste. Both pieces, saw off the excess and then plane them, shoot them square. And they should be nice and level, always round. Okay, so these are our finished 6 pieces for the case. Now at this point, you need to first of all check that everything is nice and square, and you don't have to check it against an engineering square. You just check them against themselves. So all the edges should meet whichever way around you put them. The long edges should also meet, and everything should be gap free whichever way around you put it. And if it isn't, then you need to make it good, because the whole rest of the box and the tray is reliant on this being made to the best of our abilities. So assuming everything is nice and crisp and true, and there are no wobbles, there's no gaps, nothing's springing open when you hold the corners, then go around and check if there are any dings or bits missing. So I've got a big chunk out of this corner. It's not a problem because that will all come out, that's going to be waste. So that determines which way around this has to go. So I shall mark this already. It has to go that way around, so I can remove that error. that one can be any way round. Then my box top and bottoms, there's a bit of a nick in there, so that will be that way up. And so to book match it, that one will be that way up. So I'll mark those as the tops, as in the top surface. There's no actual top and bottom to the piece. Anything wrong with this? Yeah, we've got a little bit of a corner missing just there. So that means that has a tongue cut in it. So that will be our outside face, and the matching one of those is that way round, I think. Yeah. So that's the outside and that's the outside. Instead of writing top, I should have written outside really. And outside. Now I know which side my joints are, so the joints will be cut, the groove is cut in there and in there. And go around and mark it all now, and then you won't forget and you won't have to do this process again. So that's where the grooves are cut, and then these, the tongue or the rebate rabbet is cut on that edge and on this edge and this edge. That goes all the way around. There's really nothing in these, but I might as well do it on that face. I'll do it on that face. So that's our tongue, 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 and there we have it. So just assemble it loosely. So that's the outside face, the joints are on the inside, the T-section is cut in there, they slot into the rebates, that will go on there, and then the lid will encapsulate the whole thing. These have a T-section around them, they will be floating within the ends. So this is roughly the finished dimensions. It'll be lower, of course, because it slots into the rebates, but that's roughly what we're going to be making. So you have a choice. Do you cut the rebate first, or do you cut the groove first? Well, you cut the groove first because that is a known dimension which is determined by the width of our blade. The rebate we can cut, or rabbet, we can cut any size we like because we can set the dimension to that, whereas I can't change the width of my little plough plane's iron. So we'll cut those first, then make the tongue to fit. Okay, so we need to put a groove along the two of them either side along the inside face of both the top and bottom piece. So the groove is determined by the narrowest blade I've got in my plough plane. But first of all I need to put a cutting gauge line all along the inner edge, so this line where the cut will become, and that is determined by the thickness of the material, so there'll be something like that. And so I'll set my cutting gauge to mark that line. So the first thing I'll do is turn the blade around, so I have the bevel on the inside and the clean cut shoulder is on the outside edge. Set this to material thickness, or ever so slightly greater than, and then I can plane it to fit. And the box is made, plane the edge flush, so that's just there. Nip it all up, scribe my lines. The plough planes don't have nicker blades, so this will guarantee that we get a very crisp cut line. It's on the inside, so you'll never see it, but even so, we don't want a whole load of ugly tear out. So I'm putting the workpiece up against the fence of the tool. I'm sighting down it until the outer edge of the blade is perfectly in line, or as close as I can get it, to my cutting gauge line, and then it'll follow exactly that same track. Effectively, the cutting gauge has done the job of a nicker blade, which plough planes, or box makers' plough planes of this size, don't have. If you're using a plough plane that's larger, that already has a nicker blade, then you can not bother with the cutting gauge process and just go straight to setting the tool to material thickness. If you really want to see what you're doing, or if it's all a bit too, you're not entirely sure, then get a piece of scrap, run a cutting gauge line on it, set your plough plane as best you can, and then see if you've hit your line or you're shy or whatever, and then make adjustments accordingly. But I'm happy with that. Depth of cut will be half material thickness. In this case, this is 8mm, so I'll set my depth of cut to 4mm. Okay, so the plough plane is set up as well as I think. I've sharpened the iron, so I'll do a little test cut. And I'm just going to put a few strokes along it and try and define a nice channel where the plane is cutting. And I'll use the cutting gauge that I haven't changed the setting for, do a little cut halfway along, and it should have just cut right up against that shoulder. So that's good. It's not, hasn't gone beyond it, and it's not within it, that it's not actually done anything. So the plane is set smack bang right on that line, so we're good to go. So the workpiece is hanging over the edge. There's plenty of clearance for the tool and all these bars. It's resting up against another piece of the same thickness, held down with a piece of scrap and a hold down. It's prevented from moving any further in this direction by a piece of scrap which is pushed up against the planing stop in the bench, and it can't go any further in this direction because it's held down with a, well, it's pushed up against another piece of scrap which is up against a bench dog. So all in all, this thing can't move anyway, so I'm very confident I can make my cuts, easily remove this, flip it around, and the workpiece will be absolutely still, so I don't have to hold anything. The plane is all set, so let's make some cuts. And all you have to think about is keeping the plough plane nice and vertical as you make the cut. As soon as you've got a nice channel, you can relax a little and just continue to deepen the cut until the depth stop bottoms out, and then you just stop cutting. And all you're doing is repeating the same stroke time after time. Nice and gentle, no rush. Keep the plane nice and straight, same amount of pressure at the beginning and the end, and just let the blade make the cut. So as the cut deepens and you're getting close to final dimension, you should feel that the plane is really snug in the groove. It's not wobbling all over the place. If it's starting to wobble, it's a very loose fit, then you're not keeping it nice and straight, and you're making a wider channel than the actual iron is. So it should be nice and crisp and almost stay put. Well, it does stay put whenever I let go. When you're done, put them down end to end, and you should have two very crisp, straight channels. Okay, so these are the finished, part finished ends. Now what we need is a groove cut on this end, or both ends, both pieces, that looks something like that. So it's a stopped cut. Now you can't produce a stopped cut with our plough plane. The plough plane will have taken these sections out as well, and I need these to stay as they're visible. So in order to create that cut, what I did was I set my cutting gauges to mark the perimeter, the inside and the outside edge of where I want the groove to be, and that's set exactly the same as the grooves we've already cut. And then to remove the waste, you can just chomp it all out with a chisel, but my narrowest chisel is just a little bit too wide. So that just isn't going to work. I could do it and then make the piece that fits in there a little bit wider, but I don't want to do that. I want to make them all the same size. So what I did is made a scratch stock, which is a little tool to use to make channels. So this is my little thing that I made specifically for the job. It's very rough and ready. It's not going to win any beauty prizes, but it'll do the job. So it comprises of two parts. We have the stock, which in this case is two pieces of 18mm ply glued together, made flat, and then I put a saw cut in the top and removed the waste. To remove the waste nice and true, in other words, you've got to get a flat bed in there. I just put my stock on, cramp that to it, and then use that as a chisel rest to just remove the waste from the saw cut. All very simple. To make the bar, in this case it was just a little offcut of chestnut. The saw cut about a third the way across and about that deep, whatever that is, inch and a half or so. And that's this part pinches the cutting tool, and I put it in there. I'll show you that in a minute. And the piece is held with a brass screw that has a shank on it. So the shank goes through the spring part, so it's not contained by or is not interfered with by any thread, and then the thread goes into the main body and just pulls it to or tight as normal. And the whole thing goes in there. So I fit my tool to the bar, then I position this forwards and backwards until it's in line with what I want the cut to be made. Then the whole thing gets clamped with a cramp just to hold it all in place. It's a bit crude, but it does the job extremely well. Now to make the actual blade itself, that was made with a piece of broken jigsaw blade. So jigsaw blade is very good steel. It's hardened, so you can't touch it with files and needle files. They just won't make any impression on it. So you have to use a grinding wheel. So what I did, I got my very inexpensive high-speed grinding wheel, this type that creates sparks everywhere, and ground a little piece out of it to give me a long straight edge. So that's exactly the same width as the channel, existing channel. And I put another one on the other end that's even smaller. That's it's just over 1 millimetre wide. And the reason I did this is you may be thinking, well, why go to all that trouble? Why not just use the blade that the plough plane's got, which is already the right size? Well, the reason is, apart from the fact that it's good practice to make your own tools occasionally, but we need this tool, this tiny little 1mm cut, in order to make the same grooves on the tray and the base part of this pencil case project. So you need that tool anyway. So I thought might as well just make both of them and be done with it. First of all, I flatted it all off on some abrasive paper to get rid of all the teeth. Well, having ground it off, I then made it flat, or flat enough. You can see there's still some dings in it, but none of that is interfering with how the blade end, either of those. They're nice and flat at those ends. Put the bevel on the end. I got a piece of scrap wood, cut with a saw, just put a bevel on it, hold the tool in it, then the whole lot gets dragged backwards on the abrasive paper until I've ground a very nice, even, sharp edge, and that's extremely sharp. So it's important that this top edge, and as best as you can, these flat edges under here, are also ground on your paper to make them as flat and as crisp as you can, because that actual edge also does the cutting. So put the tool in the bar, rest it onto or lower it into a channel, make sure it's been pushed. It's only cramped in there very lightly at the moment, so it can still move. So I've pushed it down to sort of final depth, make sure it's all nice and level. Then I shall nip that up a little more, put the square against it, make sure it's nice and true. We're not cutting a chamfer or an angle, so that's all good. So tighten that up a little more just to make sure it doesn't move. Now I can put the whole assembly into the stock. What I should say is I also put a half round on the leading edge. I'll need that because the tool is rotated on that edge, and then you gradually rotate it in to make the cut, and as you rotate it you take a deeper and deeper cut until you're at final dimension. I'll put my cramp on and just nip it up a little so it can slide a little, but it's still under a little bit of tension. Then drop that into the existing channel until I'm at the right place. So that's it. Now I'm going to drop it down, it just goes straight into that channel, nice and crisp. Pretty crude, it's not going to win any beauty contests, but it will do the job. It's very sturdy and nothing's flapping around. It's a big solid bar, very big stock. All that just to hold a very small blade, so it's not going to move anywhere. To begin with, I'll just take as much waste as I can out with a chisel. Going cross grain with scratch stocks is never that nice a cut unless they have little horns filed onto them or ground onto them. But we'll go over that on another day. So just take some of this waste out. I'm not really working up to the edge. The scratch stock tool can do that. Just trying to take some of the bulk out from the middle without ruining this shoulder line. I don't want that to be mangled up at all. Nice and crisp edges we want. Then I'll come in with the tool and gradually, so I'm resting it on that bar. That bar gets rested on the workpiece. Obviously the fence is up to the workpiece, and as I rotate it, I just engage the cut. So as you're working it, it's the very tip of the tool that you're just allowing to do it's just stroking that surface, and it's just severing the fibres as it passes. If you put too much pressure on it, it just bounces all over the place. As you get to the bottom of the cut, it starts to feel better and better. And to begin with, it's just it's just bouncing around the place. But it will leave a lovely flat, crisp channel. They take a bit of getting used to, but they are good tools when you've had a bit of practice. So these are our finished pieces with nice crisp ends. So now on to creating the rebates on the sides to fit neatly into our grooves. If making the scratch stock and cutting this stopped channel, this top groove, is too much trouble, then you can do it all with the plough plane. You will then of course go all the way through the ends, and you'll end up with a little square section hole there, which isn't such a big deal. When these other sides go in, you will get that square hole, and you can just make a little piece and set them all in and make a feature out of it. Anyway, we're moving on to the long sides, or the shorter sides now. So the first thing you're going to do is put the plough plane still set, same settings before, and plough those short grooves at either end. And then the rebate happens on this side, the face side, which means you're going to get a little bit left hanging over, which will look like that. You have these little pieces. Now, cutting these rebates with the rebate or rabbit plane is a very gradual, gentle cut, and these little corner pieces will easily stay in place. If you did this with a router, you routed those and then took away the waste with a big router, you might find that there's such a violent cut that these little corner pieces get removed. So I would urge you to do this I'd advise you to do it with a hand tool. So I've set my rebate rabbit plane to make that cut, which is in effect make us a tongue that'll fit that slot. So just concentrate on keeping the tool vertical and really pushed up against the stop or the fence. Let's clean that out. These tools, rebate rabbit planes, have a real tendency to clog up, or at least this style does, which is a bit of a design flaw. But they do make a good cut eventually. So just keep working your way through it, and you'll notice I've pulled the tool out of the cut and then reposition it, engage, and then make the cut. Out of the cut, up to the blade, engage, make the cut. If you keep it in there, keep going back and forwards, you risk mangling this edge with the, as it goes backwards, it can rise up, and then your nicker blade just makes a right mess on this edge, and this edge is going to be visible. So it's not a concealed joint, or half of it is, but what you're looking at is the show side. So take your time, repeat the cut, nice and slow. Just try and keep it, every cut exactly the same. So just see the last little bit of that tongue hanging in there, or that groove rather. Okay, so we have cut it off. Okay, perfect. Good. Nice and firm, but not loose. Final part of this build with the case, we need to put the rebate all around the ends. And you want to do the across the grain ones first. If there's any breakout, then the long grain cuts will easily sort it out. You're not going to get any breakout with long grain, so do the cross grain first. So I'll make another series of cuts along these. Now I want to make them a little bit deeper. If I left the plane set as it is, they would cut exactly the same place, and then there'd be no room for expansion with the cut. So what I want to do is move the fence, just the side fence, out a little bit more, take a slightly wider cut. But these things are notoriously fickle, so I'm going to put a little bit of tape on there just so I know exactly where the thing was set at the moment, or where I want it to be set. Loosen that, and I can knock it out till I take up to the tape, which is only a millimetre, barely anything. And now we've got a slightly wider cut. Same as before, pull it back and gradually work your way through it. So it'll be like something like that, a very slight shadow line. Then turn it around, other cross grain end, then both the long grain, both parts, all done. Now these little squares need to be made so they're a loose fit left to right, which will mean when they're put in, there's allowance made for the sides to shrink and expand. If you don't do that, then you'll just crack the joints open. A few strokes on each edge. And that should be just enough to allow for some movement. And then when all your pieces are made, do a dry assembly. Cut yourself some spacers, or make some spacers, so you can centre the shut line nicely on the ends. Make sure all the pieces fit easily. The slight friction fits are fine, but you don't want anything too tight. As soon as you add the glue, it'll swell and then get even tighter still. So when you're happy with your dry assembly, take it apart and glue it up. And make sure you glue it up square. So keep checking that when you're applying cramping pressure, you're not twisting it. It's very easy to make it a parallelogram, and we don't want that. So when we glue it up, you'll glue all of these long joints, and then on the end sections, the grain is running lengthways. You want a dot of glue here and a dot of glue there, just in that joint. So this can still shrink and expand across its width. It won't do it that way, but the dobs of glue will just hold it in place, so your shut line always remains where we want it to be. So make sure before you glue up, you've laid everything out in its correct orientation, so you haven't got your book matches, if you're doing that, the wrong way round. So happy that everything is matching and how it's meant to be. And apply your glue sparingly, we don't want gallons of the stuff, and then glue it all up. It's all looking good. Nice and even, and then let the cramps do their work. Let's see how this is. First of all, a little inspection at the end and see our shut lines, if they're still nice and straight and nothing's wonky. Take these little spacers out, none of those are stuck, which is good. So that's all looking pretty true. And then check the square, and that's all good. Right. So when we made these, the two wider edges were made ever so slightly over width for when we cut that rebate. So there's a little step just on these long edges, and that's deliberate. So now I'll plane those back and make them flush with the top, and then make it square all round, clean up the ends, and just make the thing much more presentable. So any fingerprints, any little bits of tear out can all be planed off now, and we'll get this back to a nice presentable tube. Okay, so to do this I shall use my low angle block plane. I'm not trying to plane great wide shavings, we're merely just dressing the surface, and any raised grain, tear out, this step, we're just dressing it back to a flat datum. So it's quite a finessing tool. So I'll set the plane to take a very, very shallow cut. A little bit of wax. The grain is going in the right direction. And then we'll just dress these edges. And keep monitoring what you're doing. So I'm a little bit high here still, but I've pretty much bottomed out there. So I'm going to avoid planing that corner anymore. Just plane down there and lift off. And the plane is telling me where it's cutting, and my fingers are just reaffirming what the plane is telling me. So I can feel that there's a slight step, and the plane is telling me there's a slight step, and then it stops cutting there. Okay, so I've lost those high peaks, and now with my 5.5, the jack plane, I'm just going to flatten the whole, dress the whole top. This is set incredibly finely, and it will find any high spots, and you'll just take them down. So those first few cuts were interrupted, and if you could hear when I got towards the end, then they were getting full length, which means any little dips were taken out, and now I'm onto I know I've got a full width, full length shaving, which is incredibly fine. In fact, it's so flat, it's being vacuumed up by the sole of the plane. So check that for square, and I can't make the square rock, so that's all good. Do that for all four sides, and then I'll shoot the ends, and then we're done. And just keep walking the plane around until it engages everywhere on the cut, and then you'll have levelled up the ends. Just a little bit off for the moment. So the pressure is always keeping the plane down. Well, the thumb is as much pulling the plane to make the cut rather than my hand pushing it. Just really almost pulling that blade around the surface. In fact, there's very little pressure coming from my left hand other than down. I'm not trying to push it. This thumb is doing all the really making the cut. And I'm still not actually touching this end part. The plane hasn't hit that yet. It's just this very slight raise on the end grain, which is exactly what we wanted. And that's all flush. Cutting all the way around. Everywhere I go, the iron is engaged. So I know I'm at my datum, so that's all good. Just check the square. That's it. Can't rock it that way. Can't rock it that way. Same to the other end. And we'll saw it in half. Now if you put too heavy a cut on and you go that way, you'll risk smashing off a load of fibres. So when you get to the end, you want almost a shearing cut, and you'll just slice away. So the fibres just been cut cleanly at an angle rather than just being walloped straight off with a flat blade. Good. Right. Saw time. So have a look over it and see if there are any areas that you particularly want to keep. So I quite like this bit of chatoyance, reflectivity going on there. I don't want to cut through that. That's pretty much there. So it's all really at this sort of end, all the interest part. So I'll leave that end alone. So I'll think about this end. You'll need a sliding bevel. So that's roughly 90 degrees. Give it a little bit of an angle, not too much. That'll probably do. Nip that up. And a soft pencil. You want sort of a lump at the bottom and a smaller part at the top. I mean, you can cut it any way you like, but I would suggest you do something like that. So when the case contains the box and the tray, it's got a longer section to move into and a little lid on the end. So if I put a pencil line across there, now keeping that same angle, follow that line around again, pick up that exactly on that point, pull it down, then turn your square over, or your bevel, and then we'll go the other way. So what we've done is created a compound angle. So it's not just a single cut, it's a cut that's also angled. Now if my box is square, when I do this last face, these two lines, or this line should meet with the original one, and it does, just there. Okay, so use the guide or the pencil line just as a guide. If you miss it, that's not a problem, but what we want is just a single coplanar cut. So don't if you're going slightly off piece, just carry on, because what we want to do is have a single saw cut that we then can plane up at the end, and we have lost as little wood as possible, because we want all this grain to ideally match up again. So on a single cut, try and hit your lines, but if you don't, it's not a big deal. So that went all right, but I've got this little bits of tear out just at the, or break out just at the end. So I'm going to cut those off with a knife and just stick those back on, and then I'll prepare this surface and then prepare that surface to fit some tape on there to keep them in position so they don't just fly away. Rub that down, I'll stick it to the tape so it stays in its right position. Cut through the lot. That's way too much. Place. Bit of tape back over those little bits of breakout, tiny bit of glue that can set, and then we're all back to good again. I could have planed it away, but I really want to keep it, maintain it being nice and crisp. If I put the original piece back in, you'll never notice. So that's our starting place. Put something flat on it. A tiny amount of rock, really not too bad. Relatively square, so I've probably got a bit of a hump in the middle. But the plane will soon tell me where the work needs to come off. So a little bit of wax, finely set. Yeah, so there we go, planing up in the middle, exactly what we just thought. Nothing at the corners, just that middle section. So you can see it's nice and smooth and shiny there. A little bit more cut, and then gradually remove the saw cuts until we're down to a single flat coplanar surface. So when you're doing this, you want to just keep working the plane over very finely, very fine setting, and it will tell you where the high spots are. Don't just plane because you're picking up a corner and trying to plane it flat. Just keep trying to just plane away the parts that are high rather than making a shaving everywhere. We want to take a little material off to get it down to a flat surface. All I'm doing is the same thing every time, and it's gradually increasing the width of this cut here, and I'm just starting to pick up that corner. I can see it's still the fresh saw cut in there and there. Just touch the bit there and a bit there. So I'm still doing exactly the same cut until all of those scruffy saw cuts have gone. Okay, nearly there, just a tiny little bit left just in this corner. But otherwise, that's that. So let's just take that up. Right. So I think that's flat. Okay, so I think that's coplanar. So that doesn't rock. Now if I put the lid on, that shouldn't rock anywhere. I'm not worried about these little fluffy bits for the minute, just seeing how my surfaces are. That feels good all the way around. But just to check if I'm true or if I've gone off at an angle, assemble it as it should be correctly. Let's put something behind just to keep it from rotating. Put a flat edge against it and it should be flush, and it isn't. So that's flush. Put the straight edge up against it and it just pulls this bottom corner out a little. So that's flush. There's a gap. So we're just a little bit high on this edge. So I'll take a few more shavings across there. It's a nice flat surface, I'm happy with that. It's just a little bit high. So I'll just take a little off. All I'm wanting to do is lower this angle just a little. Still keeping it flat. I don't want to start putting a curve on it. I just want to change that angle ever so slightly. So when the box and the tray are in it and the lid closes, it pulls up true. In the moment it's just a little bit off. Right. Good. Put the thing behind it, make it good. Okay, so now when I put the square against it, or the bevel, that doesn't open up. Good. So that's all it needed, that little bit. Now I can clean all these little fluffy bits up off, and then we're there. Okay, so just keep working your edges until it's all nice and true, and then to really test how you're doing, put the box on your workpiece, and then we don't want any little gaps showing when we rotate it. So both pieces should slide and not bind on anything, and then under its own weight, just let go and see if a gap develops. Turn it around again. Again, nothing binds. Does it close up nicely? Yes, it does. Under its own weight, no gaps. So in other words, it's not been, you haven't just made it a nice fit, but it's a little bit cockeyed. It is all true. Right, and that's the box, or the case part, finished. I've used my crank handled paring chisel just to work all of those internals to see if there are any glue squeeze out or anything inside in the inner corners that might foul when we put the box and the tray inside. So that's all nice and crisp, put that to one side. Then moving on to the internals. So we have our 5mm stock, which is for the actual box sides. Now for the box base and the tray that goes within it, there's the thinner 4mm stock. So the first thing I'm going to do is look over the timber that we've got and decide where is best to take my strip from to make the outer frame, if you like, of the box. So you can clearly see these nice curly crown section, and then this side it's very straight grained. So that tells me that part here is the centre of the actual tree, and then working our way out, this is towards the bark side of the tree. And the further confirmation is if I look at the end, and I'll draw on this so you can see, but the annular rings are going like that there. And as it comes to this side, they're getting more and more vertical until we get to this part where it's completely vertical. And so taking a strip from here will give us the least amount of, it will still shrink and expand, but it's only going to shrink and expand across its width. It's not going to want to start cupping like that or like that because of all the stresses that the annular rings are putting on it. Now, that's not going to make an awful lot of difference because it's only a barely 50mm wide box. But it's something that you want to consider, particularly when we move on to the next projects and making the toolbox with bigger drawers and bigger trays. And any cupping on the sides will have a detrimental effect on the fit of the drawer. So taking stock from the stable part of the tree or the board is something that you really need to consider depending on what part of the furniture you're making. So if this was a table leg or something, it would make no difference. But something like a drawer side that is fitted, or a drawer or a door frame that's something that's fitted, you want it to be as stable as possible. And I'll take enough material to do the two sides and the two ends. I'm not really going to measure it, I'm just going to use our box as a rough guide. So that will be one side, another side, an end, and an end. And the width wise is going to be something like that. Set the pencil gauge for that distance and then run a line along. Okay, so that's our piece. Next I'll cut two lengths, one long enough to make both sides and then the piece for the two ends, and shoot those both to final width. Okay, two sides, two ends. Okay, so this is our stock for the sides, and I need a rebate on one end or one side to accept the tray to sit in, a small groove on the base to accept the tray base or the box base, set a cutting gauge to allow about a 1mm step for the rebate, so I shall mark that all round. Doesn't need to be a lot. Taking 1mm off is more than enough just to make a little step for our tray to sit in. Now this is over length, so you can be quite generous with your marking. Now set another one for the depth, mark that all the way down. So just that tiny little line across there. And now gauge line all the way along there, so all of that is waste. Okay, so the workpiece is prevented from moving by a bench dog at one end. I've got a little bit of the scrap at the other end, then a spacer, and that's just constrained with the tail vise. It's a bit springy, so to prevent it from pinging up, I'm just going to hold it down with a cramp. There we are, that should be nicely secured. You could use a rebate or rabbit plane, but I'll do it with this. And the blade is finely set and it's even, so it takes an even cut, both sides and the middle. And that's important because I want just a complete flat cut to go down. I don't want any angles on it. So my first line will be just shy of our gauge line. I don't want to cut into that yet, so I'll leave about 1 mil short of that, plane on its side, and just cut a little angle, and then that'll be effectively a false fence to work up to as I take it down to dimension. Gradually define that cut. So just making that bevel deeper and deeper. And when I think I've got enough of a step, I can just work on the taking it down to depth. Straight away we've got a full width, full length shaving. And then move the plane over and take that, what would have been a step off, and then repeat. Okay, this actually cuts better the other way, so let's just flip that around and see if it will be a little easier. Scrap. It's better. That's much better. Right, off we go. Okay, I'm almost there. There's the tiniest little bit just left. Just better make out the little line or remnants of the line. Still keeping the plane nice and straight. So hopefully you can see I'm just picking up the little tiny bit left from the cutting gauge. There we go. So now running my finger on this edge, I can't pick up any more of the little flap that might be left from the cutting gauge. With the end, it's all nice and flat. It's not at an angle. Typically, you have a tendency to overpower the edge and put a chamfer on. That's all looking crisp right up to our knife line or our cutting gauge line. Okay, so now I just need to take out the rest of this little lump right up to our cutting gauge line. So that little edge that I left till last, so I can keep establishing that really crisp cut. Had I tried to plane with the shoulder plane straight to the line, it's likely that would be a very messy edge, and I might even remove it, just plane over it. It's very easy to take that off now with the cutting gauge and chisels. So with a nice sharp chisel, I can just work those fibres, holding it flat on the surface we've just planed. Just work that corner just under the lump, just to sever those fibres cleanly. And I think I've done enough. I can come in with a cutting gauge that's already been set and re-establish that gauge line, and we'll just sever this off as almost a continuous section. Okay, so I think I've done enough under there to get under that lump, coming with exactly the same gauge we used to begin with, and just sever that section off. And there it is. Work your way along until it comes off nice and cleanly. And doing it this way, you've got no worries about going over your line, and you'll end up with a very crisp 90-degree shoulder, which is exactly what we want. A little bit more to go just here. And there you have it. Very crisp shoulder line. So work on this little, cutting that little groove in there, which will accept the tray or the box base. The base will have a little tongue cut in it and will just slot into the groove. So this is the material we're using for the base. I'm going to set the cutting gauge just a fraction deeper than the thickness of the material on a line along the workpiece. So being ever so slightly deeper, well, greater depth than the material thickness means the bottom of the box will hit the inside of the case and it won't foul on the actual base of the box. So I can plane this if I need any adjustments without having to plane the whole of the bottom of the base. It would just be that little step difference. Then the cutting tool we'll be using is this little tool that we made earlier. So I've set that to project 1mm. Make sure it's in line with our freshly cut gauge line. And then put the workpiece on the bench, hang it over the edge a little. Secure the workpiece with some hold downs, hold fasts. Make sure nothing's going to foul. And then cut my line. Okay, so to work the tool, the bar is held flat and then rotated to an angle. The fence is pushed up against the stock is pushed up against the workpiece. And I'll gradually rotate it until I engage the cut. So I'm just literally stroking the workpiece. Rotate, pull back, rotate, make the cut, pull back. Until I force that blade to make a full depth cut until it's just stopped cutting. And you'll end up with a very crisp square section, straight sided channel. And then when you're at full depth you can have the tool rotated fully flat on its bar and you shouldn't pick up any more material. You'll end up with a very crisp, square-sided channel made from a bit of old jigsaw blade and some scrap. Okay, so a little bit of a tidy up. Now I need to saw this in half, shoot both ends until it's down to length. Okay, so they're both shot to the same length. Let's do a little test fit and see how we're doing. I'm fairly confident that they are still over length. Yeah, they are. Okay, so there's quite a bit to come off yet. Now I want it so the lid literally just goes down. Now check. And there we are, just down. Great, so they're to length. Now I can mark out and cut our dovetails. So this is my benchtop vise. It's a twin-sided vise, it's my own design. So this side has a lower chisel rest or platen, and we'll use that to rest our chisels on when we're cutting crisp shoulder lines. They cut against the cutting mat. This side has a high level vise flush with the worktop. We'll use that when we do our initial saw cuts. The whole thing is obviously elevated, which is a much more comfortable working height when you're doing complex joinery, dovetails, that sort of thing. There are various other features and I'll go over those as we use them. First of all, we need to cut some shoulders on the ends of these to make our ends the same level as this rebate. Okay, so this is our end section. I shall set my cutting gauge just a little bit thicker. We'll take a slightly thicker cut or mark than the width of the material, which will mean our tails will protrude just a little bit over the length. Now mark that line on either end, and a nicely defined gauge line, because I'm going to be putting a chisel against this in a moment. Okay, so the workpiece is secured on the bench top. I've got my scribe line, and so to begin with I'll just put a very shallow cut up to that line, and a slightly deeper one a little further back, just to raise out those end fibres, and then put the chisel not on the line but a little further, just shy of it a little. Remove the waste. You don't want to put it on the line to begin with, because the chisel is effectively a wedge. It'll be driven further that way, and then we'll lose our crisp shoulders, and I want to maintain those. So take some of that waste away, a little bit more, and then when there's nothing in front of it, then you can go onto your gauge line, and because there's no waste this side of the chisel, then there's nothing to push it that way, so you'll get a nice crisp cut without ruining our shoulder. And there you have it, and the rest of the waste can be cut back. And if you've got a router plane, this is an ideal task for a router plane. If you haven't, then perhaps run some gauge lines around it, the same thickness as our rebate, and then just pare back until you hit your lines. And then we should have just the slightest step overhanging the edge. Just continue that gauge line across. Now, box side is held in the vise, and I need to mark out where the tails are going to go. Now, I don't bother with rules or dividers or compasses or any of that. I'll just draw on roughly visually where I want them to be. So I need to avoid this channel here, so that part's going to be removed. So if I take my tail relatively close to that line, that will be plenty of clearance. It'll be symmetrical, so it'll be the similar sort of place on the other side, and then we've got easily enough width for two comfortable tails in here. I don't want the middle section to be too skinny. I need enough space to get a chisel in there to clean out that shoulder. So there'll be something like that. So we'll remove that waste, and that waste. Now, to transfer that visual reference to the actual cutting lines where I'm going to cut, I'll set a cutting gauge to where I think it's going to be, and mark the top, spin it around, and do the other side, and that immediately puts that gauge line smack bang in the middle where I want it to be. Set another one roughly to that distance and mark that. Mark it from the other side, and then we have completely symmetrical tails without having to have done any rules or blue tape or any of that kind of thing. And then using, and I'll just remove these pencil lines. We don't want those interfering anymore. That was merely a visual reference. It's not really doing anything. Get rid of that. Then using a dovetail square or marker and a sharp pencil, and just pull in those lines. I'll draw it a little bit lower so I can get a good reference when I come to do the saw cuts. And the other side. The same for the other ends. These are 1 in 8, you can use 1 in 6, 1 in 7, it really doesn't matter. I like 1 in 8, it's got a shallow cut. If this was softwood, you'd want 1 in 6, but 1 in 8 is plenty enough for hardwood. And that's it, so that's the waste, that's waste on the ends. I'll use these same cutting gauges and do all the other 3 ends, and then it'll be completely symmetrical, and they'll be exactly the same without having to resort to any kind of rules or compasses or dividers or any of that kind of thing. Okay, so to make the cut, the saw is held first of all in up to that cutting gauge line and nice and straight. And initially I'll just put a tiny cut just the other side, in the waist side of that gauge line, and that's just get something to rest my saw in while I create the angle and make the rest of the cut. So I'm in that little cut line, a little saw curve, tilt the blade over, saw over till it's in the correct angle, and just make the cut down to our line. Exactly the same in the waist side up to that gauge line. Make a little saw cut, saw curve, saw tilted over, and complete the cut. And using a jeweler saw or a fret saw or a caping saw, just remove the waste. I don't want to be a little bit shy of the line. I don't want to get too brave and go to the line. We're doing that with the chisel in a moment. Take that off. Now this blade is a spiral twist blade, so it cuts in any direction, but it's a little bit wider than the curve that the dovetail saw leaves. So if I were to drop it in there, I would end up bruising the tail. I don't want to do that. So I'll make a cut in the middle and then go left and right and take the waste out. And do that for the remaining 3. So drop the workpiece in, nip it up a little, just enough so it's loose but it doesn't drop. 2 chisels, 1 in that gauge line, 1 right on the shoulder. Lower it down and raise it up and lower it down so it's not fouling on anything. When you're happy that it's all nice and level, nip it all up, check nothing's moved, and the chisel should be perfectly in line with that gauge line. And then remove the waste. So I'm elevating the chisel a little bit, just taking out the waste and leaving a nice crisp shoulder. And the last cut is flat down on the chisel rest, and it just runs right into that gauge line, straight through to the back. Exactly the same for this one. Remove most of the waste, pointing the chisel slightly up. Then those last cuts, there's just a tiny amount left. Run straight on that shoulder line, go straight to the back. Thinner chisel for the middle. Then remove some of the waste. Lower it a bit, remove some more waste. then onto that shoulder line and just take it back. There you go. Now, because of the cutting mat, we should have a nice crisp line on the back of it without any breakout. Just a little corners need touching up with a chisel, and then we end up with a very crisp, flush shoulders. Okay, so after a little bit of clean up, this is what you should end up with. Set of 4 very nice, very crisp tails, nice and accurate lines, and used my scalpel just to clean up the corners so there's no lumps left in there. Now I prefer not to have a gauge line cut on the front face, but that's entirely up to you. Prepare 2 ends. They're exactly the same width as the sides, but they're a little bit over length, so they'll slide in nicely widthwise, on their height rather, but for length they won't quite fit, so they'll just touch, and that's deliberate because we're going to put the pins on this side, or both their sides, and they'll be a little bit longer than the actual size, so they'll protrude just a fraction. So when it's all glued up, we can just plane that back and have a very crisp joint. And so in order to make it a very good fit, you have to remember to allow for that extra width when you're planing these to length, or to width. So I'll put the end piece in the vise, right up to the stop. Put the side onto it, and then I'll just raise it up till it's right under that shoulder. Push everything nicely up to the fences. Nip it up so it's not going to move. I can move my little cramp along, and then tighten that up. Now this, being able to secure your work in this manner is hugely beneficial because it means nothing's going to move. So when I come to transfer the tails to make the pins, I know it's all exactly in the right position. It doesn't matter how well you cut your pins, if you're doing it to lines that were marked wrongly, well then it's just not going to fit, or it's going to be loose or whatever else. So I can confidently mark this with quite a lot of pressure, knowing that nothing is going to move. And I'm holding the scalpel at a slight angle. It's a double bevel blade, so I want to get a flat line, or a flat cut onto the workpiece. So I need to take out the amount of bevel. So if I had it vertical, then because it's a bevel, the actual point would be a little further away. And I don't want that, I want it right on that line. So I'm just angling the blade a little, making a very definite cut. And those are our cuts. Now this is the smallest size box really that you can make in this vise. Any smaller than that, you just won't be able to grab it, but that's just enough. Oops, I'll turn that around the other way so I can see the gauge line. And with my dovetail saw, I'll just remove the majority of the waste, so a little bit shy of the line. I don't need to go right on it. Oops. And I don't want to go below, certainly not below the line, but a little bit shy of it is more than enough. And then with my jeweler's saw, I just remove the bulk of the waste. So this is the inside face with the gauge line going all the way across. Now the face side, the outside, I don't want a gauge line going all the way across, but I do want to put a line in between these three posts, just so I don't get any breakout from the back, or don't mess up those fibres. So I'll just scribe a little line in between the pins. So that's the face side, or the outside, and that's the inside. I move it freely with my fingers, but it's not going to drop. I'm using 2 chisels, same as before. Drop it into that gauge line, and the other way, lower it down till we've got it nice and in line with our chisel rest. Nip it all up, and then I can remove the waste. A little bit at a time. You don't need to take too much off, or you'll risk moving it in its position. You don't want to be doing that. So just work it a little bit at a time. Chisel is again facing slightly up, so not all the way down yet. When you think you've removed the bulk of the waste, put the chisel down nice and flat, lots of pressure down on the chisel, and just gradually work that surface cut. You're not going to get any, you'll get a nice crisp cut at the back because you've just put that gauge line just where you want it, but also those fibres are nicely supported at the back by the cutting mat, so they're not just going to, you'll get a very crisp edge, and I'll show you that in a moment. Not a horrible fluffy edge. And then I don't bother with any vertical lines because I let the chisel do all that. So I'll hold the chisel down on the chisel rest, nice and vertical, and then line it up with the correct direction of travel and take a fine shaving, exactly the same. So I'm just working my way up to that gauge line. There's one more on that corner. That's it. And then remove the waste. Same for the other way. Okay, and check for any lumps in any little bumps in the shoulders that you might have missed. Just clean those out because they will foul the joint and to stop it going completely home. So I'm sure everything's really crisp. And then assemble the joint. And dovetails of this size should only require finger pressure to assemble. So nice crunchy noises, that's what we like. It's not too tight, certainly not sloppy. You can pick it up and hold it around. Crisp on the inside, no gaps. And there should be just the slightest protrusion from these pins. So when it's all glued up, we can just plane those back, and then the box should fit in snugly within the case. And plane the ends of the tails as well. And that's it. So do any remaining ones, then we'll put the box together. Well, we'll make the base, and that'll be it. And it should also be nicely in line, so there's no step in there. Turn it around that way, so it's nicely level as well. There's no step, and all of that is a result of using the transfer fence and having your material stock precisely planed before we started. Okay, so now you should be at this stage with the box sides and ends all complete, and then the case all ready. And we need to move on and make so to finish the box, we'll just put in the base. That's the box part done. And when that's all glued up, plane back the protruding pins and tails, and then make our internal tray. So this is the 4mm stock that we prepared at the beginning. And I'll cut a piece out, ever so slightly oversized in all dimensions, so a little bit longer or wider, and a little bit longer. Now this is only going to be held in with the tongues cut to fit in those channels. That's all that's holding it in. We might put a cocktail stick in the ends just to support the ends, but really it's hardly going to have a lot of weight in it, so that's probably enough. So that's my piece I'll take out. I'll just saw that out, plane it to length, cut the tongues and fit it in. So I need to find the distance I need. So I'll do that with the calipers and include a little bit for the tongues, and then shoot this to width. Transfer the dimension with the pencil gauge. I could use a cutting gauge, but I really don't need to. Pencil gauge is fine. Sneak up on final dimension, then use the calipers to ensure that I actually hit it. .42 and 39.44. Fraction off of there, and then a full length. I'll shoot it to length when we put the joint on, but that's wide enough now and a little bit oversized just to allow those to plane the tongues. Okay, so these are our sides, and we need to put 2 little tongues on the base to slot into that bottom channel that we cut with a scratch stock earlier. Now I've done a test piece, and that is a snug fit, almost too tight, but what I'm going for is a sliding fit, something more like that, because the base will not be held in there. It's just going to be, well, it won't be glued, it's going to be a loose fit, and it needs to be able to shrink and expand on its own accord and not be constrained by any glue lines. It's not really going to move much, but this is good practice. So a sliding fit like that is what we're going for. So to make the cut, I'll be using my rebate plane, rabbet plane. I've taken the nicker blade off, or rotated it so the spur is not engaged. The spur protrudes too much and it will literally just slice that. It would risk slicing the tongue off, and we don't want to lose the tongue. So nicker blade's out the way, and I'll just set the fences to do a test cut first of all, and I'll repeat that on the final thing. Now for the moment, this base is over length, and that's deliberate because I want to, the lead in and lead out can often be a little bit scruffy when you're making such tiny little cuts. So it's very easy to go over length and then cut it, shoot it to length to fit when the job's done. Work holding of such skinny pieces is always critical. You need this to be held extremely firmly. I can't risk it moving. So I've blocked it up with a little spacer. It's the same thickness, a bit of scrap. Well, it's not scrap, that'll actually be the base of the tray when we get around to making that. Just to span the width. Cramp that down hard or tight, cramp that down tight. Make sure you just cannot move it, and then check for clearance that no fences are going to collide with any of these blocks. And when we're happy that we're all good to go, we can make the cut. should be it. A little bit tight at the end. Right. A little test fit, and what we're looking for is a nice sliding fit, not sloppy, just a sliding fit. And I want a gap. So that gap is deliberate. We need that to allow it to expand and shrink. So ultimately we're going to take a little bit of the edge of the tongue off. So it's a gap in between the tongue and the channel, and so it can just shrink and expand into that tongue. It is very fine, very small, almost unnecessary, but it's good. It's good practice, particularly when we move on to the more complex projects. Good. So turn it around and do the other side. Now, because there's no nicker blade, I'm quite happy to retract the plane in the cut. The nicker blade can often effectively dig in and then ride itself up and put a big score on your workpiece. But the nicker blade has been retracted for this, so it's not there. So there's nothing really to foul the workpiece. I think I'm there. We'll test. And there we are. Nice sliding fit. Okay, so assuming all of our measurements were correct, this should be a nice sliding fit in the box with just the slightest amount of movement left to right. Okay, so that's a nice fit, and it should just go a little bit left to right. Hopefully you can hear that moving. Good, so now I can shoot the ends to length until it fits neatly within our box. Okay, so the box assembled dry, fits nicely front to back, so there's no gaps at the base, and you should just be able to hear it sliding left to right. Small, very slight amount of movement, which is exactly what I wanted. It's a nice loose-ish sliding fit, which is exactly what we need. So I'll have a tidy up the bench now, and then we shall glue it up. So because the dovetails protrude, I can't cramp up right against the box, because the cramp will just hit the protrusions and not actually cramp up the face. So I'm going to make a series of cramping aids, which is just a piece of cardboard that's thicker than the protruding tails, or pins in this case, and then I can use those to space it out and apply some pressure without interfering with the joint. Just draw on a few dovetailed sections, and I'll chop those out a little undersized, just to allow plenty of space for the glue, so I can still see what I'm doing. If this is new to you, it'll all make perfect sense in a moment. Okay, so this little spacer will allow the pins to protrude through. I can still see what's going on because this little spacer is smaller all round than the actual tails. So I can see what's going on, and the cramp can hit this and allow the pins to protrude without interfering with the joint. Enough space so I can see any glue and see if the joint has gone all the way home. So you want to wet out all the surfaces that are going to be in contact to ensure a good glue bond, no dry joints, just enough glue to do the job. You don't need
gallons of the stuff. You want as little squeeze out as possible. And you should find what was a squeaky, crunchy joint when it was dry now becomes a slippy, slidey joint and is much easier to assemble. And then cramp it up. Okay, so it's been in the cramps for about 5 minutes. I've just removed it, flipped my flats back, cleaned up any excess with some water and a toothbrush, and now they can go back in the cramps for the remainder. And so those spacers are allowing cramping pressure to go right on the ends of the tails, right up to our, putting it nicely home within the joint. And because I'm right on the cramping centres are right on the end pieces, I'm not getting any deflection, I'm not bowing the middle of the box, it's all nice and straight still. And the beauty of having an open box cramping up is that I can work on the tray while this is cramping. I don't have to wait for anything to finish. Okay, so the tray sides are made from very thin stock, too narrow to get a hold down on to be secured with the holds down. So I put a scrap piece down, so that's operating as a fence. Another piece of scrap as an end stop, and I'll just have to work it. Same tool, but just work it by hand. So that's all 3 pieces done, 2 sides and enough for 2 ends, more than enough. Okay, so there's the first 2 mitered ends. This is just a mitered tray, and the length is determined by what's going in it, which in this case will be pencils. That's the longest thing that's going in it. The scalpel's shorter. And so if I make it about that long, that'll do. So I'll saw the excess off and then shoot that to a mitre. So this is the piece I want to protect the end from any breakout. I'm going to put the one that's way too long behind it, and just shoot a mitre on both of them. So the trouble with shooting mitres of tiny little pieces like this is that you can't see what you're doing. The plane completely obscures your view. So you have to listen and hear the cut being made, and just set the plane very finely and keep checking your work. Okay, so cutting pieces this small on a table saw would be interesting, whereas with a plane of sharp iron and a dedicated shooting board, it really is very easy to just sneak up on final dimensions with lots of care and, frankly, ease. It just takes a little bit of patience and you'll get a very crisp result. Okay, so there are our final pieces, and I can flip everything over, assemble it with some tape. This is only going to be a taped joint, doesn't need anything more than that. So a dry fit, check everything is as it should be. There's our tray. Nice even shut lines. Plenty big enough for some pencils and a scalpel and all the stuff I use all the time. So I can undo this, glue it up, and then we'll plane it back to fit tomorrow. Let's see what we've got. Just clean that up in a minute. And for the tray, now be careful when you're taking tape off. This isn't too bad because it hasn't been under a cramping pressure. But if that was under a cramping pressure as well, in other words, if the cramps are actually on the tape, then it would really put the glue into the fibres, and you can very easily tear out wood fibres. But because this is only done hand tight, there was no risk of that. So that's all looking crisp. There's nothing slipped. It's all, in other words, they haven't gone out of true. Got nice sharp corners. Still in nicely in step. And our base is all still in the right place. So that's looking like it should be a good fit. And it is. A little bit of clean up, hardly any, and then we'll finish that off. So just plane back all these protruding pins and tails, and then see if it fits in our case. So I'm going to use my block plane. Now this is incredibly finely set. I want to take the finest shaving I can possibly take and just creep up on dimension. Wax it up, and I don't need to cramp this. I literally will just hold it with my hands, and working from the back towards the middle, because I want any fibres to be pushed into the cut, not broken out. I don't want any risk of tear out or breaking the fibres away. And a slight shearing cut, so I'm holding the plane at a little bit of an angle, and I'll just slice the ends off a little bit at a time until I'm through. Keep monitoring what I'm doing. And again, there's no rush in this. I'm literally just taking those tops off. So you can see how they're nice and flat now. They're still too tall, but it's all cleaned up. Any grime, if you look at compared to that one, it's quite dull. That one, they've all gone their natural brown kind of colour. So I shall keep working that down until they're flush. I don't want to take any material off of the sides. We might have to plane this a little to get it to fit in the box, the case, but we'll see. We'll see how we go. I just don't want any big gouges taken out of this. There's one process at a time. So those are the little teeny weeny shavings. Pretty much holding the whole weight of the plane. Because here it's okay, because it's sort of supported by the base, but in here it will flex a bit. So you can't put a load of pressure on it. It really is just a slice to take those end fibres down. Okay, that's down, because it's just starting to scrape. That's down. I can feel it scraping the side. And that one isn't quite yet. And there it is. So that's it. They're all flushed and no cuts into the sides. Right, do that on the other three, and then we'll do the ends. And when you're working with a very finely set plane, be it a block plane or a 4 or smoother jack, whatever, when you put it down, in fact every time you put a plane down, you just place it down, don't plonk it, or you risk adjusting the set, and then you'll pick it up and wonder why you've just taken a huge gouge out of your work. Okay, so nice and steady with your planing of these tails and the pins, and you'll end up with a very crisp work with still nicely maintained edges. Now just to dress the top and the base, just to flush it up, any little steps or glue that's come out, and then we'll do a test fit. So again, extremely finely set. I don't want to start changing the shape or planing too much off. I'm literally just picking up any high spots that we might have. And the plane will tell me where they are. Okay, so before I keep doing loads and loads of test fits, I need to put a tiny relief on these inner edges of the case, just to prevent these getting mangled. And this is just chisel work, so I've scribed a tiny little pencil line just to give me a guide to work to. You want a low raking light so you can see the shadow that this little chamfer is creating. So I can create a nice even chamfer. It's very easy to overcut the ends because it's difficult to start the chisel. So you have to allow for that. Take a tiny little, use a tiny corner of the chisel, just make your lead in cut, and then when you think you're on track, just keep the chisel in the same angle and take a single continuous shaving. Chisel should be skewed, so when you get to the end, you naturally create a mitre. And that should be a nice even chamfer. Now I can turn it around and come the other way, just to even up the angle. And it's details like this that will elevate your work from sort of mediocre, if you like, to really crisp, thought through, finished pieces. And by doing this, this will always be a nice edge. You won't get all mangled up every time you put the case in and out, or the box in and out. Okay, so I spent some time putting these chamfers on the inside faces of the case, just to allow a good, clean, safe insertion of the box. And I've taken some time as well to flat the underside of the box, so that is nice and flat. I've barely touched the top surface. I've just really given it one few strokes just to take any steps away. We've done the tails, we've done the pins, so it's all looking nice and crisp. Now I need to do a test fit. And because of this oblique angle, it is a bit tricky lining it up, but just trust yourself that you've got it in line, and then you'll find it will go in. And that's actually, oh crumbs, that's just a bit too tight. Okay, so we've got it in, but that's too much. Let's see what the lid's like. It should be exactly the same. Okay. So the fit I'm looking for is a friction fit. So I want to be able to hold it up and nothing falls apart. But that is too tight. Will it go the other way around? Okay, I'm sure it will, but I'm not going to force that. Okay, so we're a little bit tight, or it's too tight. Yeah, too tight. The tray fits very nicely, and that's a sliding fit. So I wanted that just to easily glide in and out and have no resistance on it at all. And it's nice and crisp at the ends. Nice flat sides. And it's meant to be short, so it's very easy to retrieve. Okay, so we need to decide where we're going to take some material off, and it's clearly not the height, because I can wiggle it ever so slightly up and down, so it must be the width. So I need to take these sides down just a fraction at a time until we have a nice friction fit. I'm looking for it to go in just effortlessly, but not loose. It can't just flop in there. I've made it a little block which will snugly fit in the tray. Put the tray in, and now I've got a nice firm surface to plane to. If I didn't do that, then the whole sides would just flex, and I need to keep this flat. The plane is set incredibly fine, and we'll see if we can just stroke a few tiny shavings off the sides until I can feel that it's just a little bit greater, a bit thicker this end. Now, the difference between a nice friction fit and a sloppy fit is probably 2 strokes of this plane. So you really have to take care and keep monitoring what you're doing. There's no rush. You can't put it back. Okay, so it's still way too tight. Right, I shall work on this and then show you when it's done. Okay. Test. Very, very nearly. Right, well that's very nice. That's just a fraction wide. Just a fraction. So that is how much has come off, which is, I don't know, 10, 15 shavings. I think that should be it. Yeah. Lovely. That's it. Take that out. That's all good. Right. Put the lid on. Pulls up nice and true. Okay, so the project is all finished now, apart from some oiling, which I'll do in a minute with some linseed oil. I've taken a very finely set block plane to all of these outside edges, just to take that very sharp arris off, so it's just nicer to hold. It's finely set. I didn't want to put a big chamfer on there and ruin or spoil the actual crispness of the shape, but it's just enough to make it comfortable. So now it's time to load it up with everything it was designed to carry, which is my marking out tools. So the idea is the box part takes the spares, and then the tray, which will be on my bench all the time, has the pencils and the scalpel that I use regularly. And that should all fit snugly inside our case. And there you have it. Friction fit pencil case project.
So that's the end of the project and the conclusion of this introductory series. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Coming up next will be a follow-up video where I shall just address some of the comments I've had throughout the series, particularly the use of a flat iron to create surfaces without leaving track marks. So I shall do a separate demonstration on that. If there's anything else you'd like demonstrated or clarification on, then please add it to the comments and I shall try and include it in the follow-up video. I will also announce some of the plans I have for the channel and my ideas going forward. But that's the end of that. I hope to see you on the follow-up video and thank you for your time.